Hey, sheepdogs. So, this is kind of a deep topic. Was having a conversation with a young officer the other day about why law enforcement is so stressful. When you think about it, law enforcement, and if you've never been there, it's kind of like the old Vietnam saying, if you didn't go, you wouldn't know. Different people's experiences with Vietnam are different. They served in different capacities, non-combat, or they served in different roles in combat, different branches of service in combat. Law enforcement is much that way. But if you never served, you probably don't know. And I'm actually experiencing stressors that are unique to me now, not unique to me, only me. But what I mean is I haven't experienced those before because now I am in law enforcement. Those of you who don't know me, I've spent 15 years as a civilian police chaplain alongside officers. Had some pretty wild things happen, but it's a different conversation when you put on a badge and strap on a duty belt. So what is it about law enforcement that makes it so stressful? In many departments, you work 12-hour shifts. During those shifts, you are probably riding around in a vehicle by yourself. This is one that a lot of officers go, I haven't really thought about that until you said it. Frequently, you are by yourself except for brief contacts with the public for long extended periods of time. You're driving around in a vehicle, and it's really not good on your body to be sitting all the time. But so much of law enforcement, you're driving a vehicle or you're driving a desk. And with brief stints of oftentimes negative contact with the public, and it can make you not like people. Okay, so that's a much broader topic, but that is a part of it. So you get out of your vehicle, and oftentimes you're serving a nuisance warning, or you're dealing with something truly awful. So a lot of your contacts with the public are negative, and it can make you dread the public because even the contacts that are not in the line of duty, you're standing in line at the convenience store or whatever. During those contacts, somebody has to walk up and they have to crack a stupid joke. You walk in the door, and it's a fear-based response. It's silly. But they're like, I didn't do it. He did it. Take my kid to jail. Take my friend to jail. And my pat response to that now is when I walk in a door and somebody goes, I didn't do it, or they did it, I go, ooh, that's not what they told us. And something to that effect. One of my favorites was somebody, they did it. I said, you should be careful about hanging out with this guy. My eyes are real big. And they looked at me and they start laughing because I've got an exaggerated expression on my face. And I was like, you see how quick he rolled on you? And they started laughing. I turn it back into a joke, but you get tired of hearing the same old jokes again. I've had people multiple times tell me the same old joke, not realizing you've heard it a lot. And it can make you dread getting out in public. And I'm a people person and I want to stay that way. But it is tough. And so you're by yourself for a huge amount of time. And then you may be working a county role where you run code all night. It is not healthy for a person to have to drive at a high rate of speed constantly. So you're running wee woo from one side of your jurisdiction to the other all night long or all day long, depending on where you work and what shift you work. That's a huge amount of stress. And they're proving that it takes around 12 hours to come back down from a shift. So if you're working in some jurisdictions, you can carry more than one commission. A lot of people, when they're new to the badge and they have a huge blue flame going on, they're working as many shifts as they can pick up. It's not healthy. You need time for your brain to relax. I spent some time this morning with my pet fire, aka my fire pit, sitting out, just enjoying the beautiful, cool morning air. And sometimes I do some creative writing, and so I was sitting there doing some editing on that, and just kind of chillaxing and off-gassing and gelling and just letting all of that stuff run away, not getting on social media and those sorts of things. And that's very healthy because you've got to get time away. If you're working 12-hour shifts, there was a department I read about the other day that they are discussing going to 24-hour shifts like a fire department. And I guarantee you what's going to happen is they're going to be responding to calls. They're not going to be proactively patrolling. And you think about driving a long distance across country, you need to get out of your vehicle fairly frequently, from time to time, just to loosen up and what have you. They have transatlantic flights where you're cooped up in the cabin of an aircraft, and a lot of people get up to start moving around. They have strokes or heart attacks because of their transatlantic or trans-Pacific flight they've been sitting down for too long. You need to get up and stir around. And I know officers that'll mix it up. They'll drive around for a while. They'll get out and stretch their legs for a few minutes and what have you. It's you're cooped up in the cabin of the vehicle, and sometimes it's really hard just because of the smells inside the vehicle. Maybe you've cleaned it as best you can and it smells like Lysol, but somebody threw up or urinated or defecated in the back of your cruiser, and so that's a thing. But so you got those stressors, and then you just never really know what a call is that you're going to go to. I responded to one with an officer the other day. We were running 2 in the vehicle, and on the way there, we were responding to an explosion in a rural area, running code mutual aid to get there to back that department, and they didn't have anybody available, so we were headed there. And in the course of that, I've loaded a carbine, because we've been informed that area was known for meth labs, which we don't really see those here in the United States like we used to. I mean, it still happens, but being told that that there had been a meth lab that exploded there, okay, that gets your attention. Am I going to find burned bodies? Am I going to find people that are dead? Am I going to have to triage people on a color code? Am I going to get there and the explosion was somebody being redneck and stupid, or are they still going to be hurt and dead? Are we going to get there and people want to get in a firefight, a gunfight with you because they don't want to go to jail for having a meth lab that blew up? Am I going to find somebody burned and bleeding with shrapnel sticking through them or whatever? Corpses, gun battle corpses, triaging people, having, I've got my medical bag at my feet, I've got my hard armor ready to go. What am I going to pull up to? And I talk about in other episodes of the podcast and chats with the chaplain, I talk about going not knowing. That's a huge thing about law enforcement, is you just really don't know. And oftentimes what you're dispatched to, because of the way that it's dispatched, and I'm not poo-pooing on dispatchers, but what I mean is oftentimes the way that it's called over the radio, like I was with an officer and he had no backup, and I was there as his chaplain, and he was like, hey, I need you to watch my back. He was dispatched to an active shooter in progress, and I've talked about this one before, but it was a guy that got attacked in a parking lot, and he drew his concealed carry, his legal, as I understand it, concealed carry firearm to defend himself, and there was 1 shot fired in self-defense. That's not an active shooter, and but he was dispatched to one because that's the way the person that called it in. They called it in as I understand the call, multiple shots fired, 1 shot fired. So you get things like that, going not knowing. And then you get things like, I had a guy tell me, this young man was telling me the other day, great kid, great cop. No, he's not a kid. Great young man, and a God-fearing young man at that. But he was discussing with me, he had gone to deal with a well-being checkup. And when you go to well-being checkup, and that's something I want to start talking about as I shift the focus in this particular video, is you got to do a well-being checkup, and the person could be fine. The person could be alive and need medical care. The person could be just depressed and not wanting to talk to people, and could be very hostile with you because you came to the door, demanding that you get off of their property. Or you may find a dead body. You may find somebody that's dying or dead. And many times I've talked to officers that are like, I pulled up to another one and I knew it was going to be bad. And you have to help in many departments. You actually have to help move the body. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. I don't enjoy doing it. But when the bodies are bad, there's flies all over the windows. It's not pretty. And then he went to the very next call after finding somebody. In this case, the gentleman was alive, but he responded to the very next call, and it was a lady who was angry because of a very minor thing in her neighborhood. There was a dead animal, and she wanted this officer to remove it. And I guess they just didn't have City Works or anybody available, and she was angry that he didn't bring a truck with him to haul it off, not realizing that he's there to enforce the law, not necessarily scoop up a dead animal. And I think he did the best with what he could, what he had available to take care of it for her. But she was very hostile, and it was hard for him. Because you come from something truly terrible where you're dealing with somebody who is dying. The person was in really bad shape and may have survived, but would not have without medical intervention. And then you deal with somebody that really, that's the worst day that they've had in a long time, was a dead animal out on the street. And this person making demands that they feel are justified in the moment. And I try to remember, well, ma'am, sir, I'm glad that that's the worst thing that's happened to you this day or this week. Forgive me if I'm not super chatty. I just came from a medical call where a guy was dying. So forgive me if I'm not super chatty. I try to remember that perspective, but it can be tough. And, I had a guy tell me that he went from, and I've talked about this before in videos, but it still resonates with me very powerfully, from doing a death notification to a mom that her child would never come home. And if I remember the story right, the child was a teenager to maybe around 20. It was pretty young. And the caught the mom on the way to the floor as she was collapsing in the doorway, and then had to respond to a call where somebody was angry about the fact that their neighbor's bumper was over the property line, and they know because they measured and checked it's 1 foot. Their bumper is 1 foot over the property line, and you need to go fix this because this is the end of the world. People get silly. So you deal with weird stressors where you come from a nothing call to a terrible call to a nothing call, and you deal with child abuse situations and things that just shock you that human beings can do them. And then you're supposed to go home from an elevated stress level that's much like combat. You're supposed to go home from this and be able to just relax and detox, and it's as though nothing ever happened. That's not how that works. And your brain, and I've talked about this 15 different times, but it's super valuable. Your brain needs to hit REM cycle sleep in order to cleanse itself. Think of a windshield wiper on a windshield. In order to clean itself, the brain, and get rid of the toxins that you have been experiencing during the day, the brain needs to hit REM cycle sleep. And you can Google it. The venerable Colonel Dave Grossman talks about it in his books. I'm not sure which one it is, if it's On Killing or On Combat. But you go through these terrible, terrible stressors, and those stressors, what they end up doing is, if your body cannot get those toxins out, you become more irritable. You become less friendly. You can snap at people you love. You have friends and family that are telling you, I love you, but you're just not the same person. And you don't necessarily mean to be a bear, but you are, because you're not getting the right amount of sleep. And we add things to it, whether it's a stimulant like caffeine, nicotine, any kind of a nicotine or vaping product that will keep you awake, energy drinks, sodas, all of those things, and then depressants like alcohol. A depressant like alcohol may loosen you up and make you feel more relaxed, but it can actually be a true REM cycle sleep inhibitor. And again, I've talked about all these things, but for some of you folks out there, it may be a new thing you've never heard of before. And so we're not getting to true REM cycle sleep. I don't drink caffeine. If you drink caffeine within 6 hours of when you're going to go to bed, from what I understand of it, you're dealing with the half-life of that caffeine. Half of the effective potency of it is still in effect in your body, and you're not going to really sleep well. And so what I do is I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I'm typically in bed by 10 o'clock at night. I can get a lot done early in the morning, and I drink coffee until no later than 2. Oftentimes I'm done by 1 o'clock, and I sleep like a baby. And I got rid of soda. I don't drink soda anymore. I've lost weight. I don't eat a lot of sugary foods, and that's more of a weight loss thing than anything, but that will help you get to REM cycle sleep. So then that child abuse case that you saw, or that child that, whether it was a molestation or it was a beating, or the body of the dead child you found, that somebody that was out of their mind on drugs injured and killed the child, or they turned around and neglected the child, and the child is in critical condition, headed to the hospital, or the child has died. You find the body of a child. I know an officer that's no longer an officer because he found the dead body of a child that drowned, and something in him snapped, and she looked a lot like his daughter, and he was done. And that was back in an era when you weren't a real man to man if you went to counseling. Well, we've got to take care of our mind, even more so than we have to take care of our body. But this young man and I were talking, and as we were talking, I said, what other profession in the same week could you pull up to a wreck and see a fatality? Could you see a child that was somehow sexually abused? Could you You can respond to a sexual assault, a molestation, child neglect, and endangerment. You could respond to a dead body. You could respond to someone dying multiple times. You could have to do CPR, and it just exhausts you, and you're afraid, did I not do enough? And you want to follow up and find out if the person made it alive. You know, did they survive to the hospital? Or did they get checked into the hospital? Are they okay? And you may not ever know. And sometimes it's best not to. And you know, you're running code across county and you're responding to a physical domestic with a knife out, or someone threatening him with a gun, and you get there and it was nothing like that, and it's much ado about nothing. Or you get dispatched to somebody lurking around a property, and this person's a suspicious person, and by the time you get there they've stabbed somebody 13 times. What other job are you going to deal with those possibilities? Or you're running up to a vehicle fire and your department hasn't issued fire extinguishers, and as you run up to that vehicle fire, trying to save that person, you can't get there, and you have to watch and listen and smell and taste them burn to death. The stresses and stressors of law enforcement are completely different and unique compared to many other jobs. Combat is the only thing that I could say would exceed it, and then depending on the combat environment that you're in or where you are serving in law enforcement, it may be 6 of one, half dozen the other. I've talked to guys that were in combat zones and served for an entire tour, never fired a shot in anger, no ambushes, no IEDs, no problems in some of the hottest parts of the Afghanistan or Iraq war zones, and then came back to law enforcement, and their first day on the job had to draw down on somebody that was, you know, refusing orders and armed with a knife or a crowbar or something. That's something to really think about when it comes to that. And then you got other stresses like public opinion. You know, I've had people that they seem to feel like they need to send me every negative police interaction out there, and I'm like, why do you spend time watching them? What does that do for you? How does that help you? And you know, there's officers that don't handle themselves well, and they just do a disservice to the badge. But then there's also officers that are picked at and poked and prodded, and unfortunately we can't let that get our goat, but sometimes it does, and we have to be on our A game 99.5%, you know, 1,000% of the time. But the bad guy can act like a complete child or worse, and we have to behave ourselves perfectly. It's a tough deal because we're also human. They don't grow police officers in special vats and march us out like clone troopers. We're real people, and we have real hot buttons. There's things that bother me in law enforcement that don't bother some of the best cops that I know. You know, and we all have our pet peeves and things that we are bothered by, and we have our weaknesses and our flaws that we have to compensate for. You also deal with things like people who are, you deal with situations where people are, they send you these videos and they want you to apologize, basically, is almost what they're asking for. They want people to apologize for, want you to apologize is the word I'm looking for the behavior of another officer. Man, you know, I know you're a good cop, but there's just not enough good cops out there, and the good cops aren't getting rid of the bad cops. And finally, I've started turning to some people when they won't stop doing it, and I'll know what they do for a living, or I'll ask what they do for a living, and I'll say something to the effect of, you know, well, so you're a mechanic. You know, my mom was ripped off by a mechanic, so, you know, I've been ripped off by a mechanic. So what are you doing to get rid of the bad mechanics? Because there's too many bad mechanics out there, and the good mechanics aren't getting rid of the bad mechanics. And they're like, well, I don't have any control over that. I'm just doing my job, man. And I'm like, well, you have to understand that's how it works for me too. Is I'm not in Tennessee. I'm not in Texas or Florida or, you know, whatever. I'm not in those areas. I am where I am, and there's only so many things that I can do where I'm at. And you know, I personally know officers that have testified against officers that were many times that were bad cops and doing things that were illegal. I know probably a half dozen cops that have lost their jobs due to dishonoring the badge from one one area or another. And then you got situations like admin. Like I know departments that they won't leave you alone. Like on the weekends and during your time off, they're blowing your phone up. And I understand that you've got ongoing investigations, but there needs to be some balance in life. So you're doing swing shifts and you're going back and forth, and try that. Try sleeping days for a week and working at night. And then try hard shift switching to sleeping nights and working days. And it's the people that are out at 2 o'clock in the morning are not the same kind of people that are out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's just a totally different environment. And the police work is completely different. Because you're dealing with a lot of drug interdiction and a lot of people that are high and off their medication and things at that time of night. A lot of bad stuff happens in the middle of the night. So you've got that. And then you've got admin that won't leave you alone. And they won't leave you alone, and they won't sometimes honor the things that they've said or promises that they've made or things like that. So you end up with people who you get promised something. I know somebody that was promised something in his department and it went a different direction, and he was very upset, understandably so, and makes you want to quit, either quit that department or quit law enforcement. And so burnout is such a thing, and people are like, I don't understand why it's so stressful. And then you deal with things, and I've said this before even on this podcast, but you deal with things like, a couple of officers are pulled up to a set of pumps. They're across from each other pumping fuel. They've just come from a wreck where a person was literally, torn to shreds. And they've spent the last however much time going around picking up what was left of a human being and putting it in a bag. And they pull up to a set of gas pumps and they're pumping gas, and they're like, man, we're kind of hungry, but can we keep it down? This was nasty and intense. I've seen parts of a human being that I don't think I was ever meant to see. And then so they have that going on. Can I keep down the food? Is it safe for me to eat? And then a guy pulls up in his truck and goes, is that all you guys do is stand around? Because all I ever see you guys do is stand around. And they drive off. And I've said it before, but the officers are standing there looking at each other going, I know of a half dozen jobs I could go get right now that pay more than this, that nobody tries to kill me, and I don't have to put up with that. What is it about law enforcement that's so stressful? And then you've got the fact that you have to make split-second decisions that everybody gets to Monday morning quarterback. Other cops, the public, the news media, they get to try to crucify you. I mean, I've got friends that were recently involved in a good move at their department that I deeply respect. And when they took that stand and did that move, when the replacement officers were arriving, and there was a major changing of the guard, the news media tried everything in their power to get the new officers in chief to talk bad about the old guard that was leaving. What does it feel like to? And finally, the chief, and I deeply respect this, he's like, no, these are my friends, and they're helping me, to understand this and that and the other about the department and where this is and how this is done, and is this stored here or whatever. It's a complete, you deal with the news media that will twist things and absolutely lie and claim something that happened that didn't, and there's absolutely no holding them accountable. What is it about law enforcement that's stressful again? So it's just things like that you think about, that it makes you go, man, I'm not sure if I want to do this. And you need to be able to relax, and you need to be able to have downtime. And imagine that if you're working in an environment where you're always dealing with that huge amount of stress, your body has to come back down from that. Those life and death situations and dramas, your body has to come back down from that a certain period of time and go to the opposite end of the spectrum in order to heal. And if you're never able to do it, you become exhausted. And I don't mean tired, I mean physically and mentally exhausted. And this is why we have things like officer suicide, and burnout is so high, and people make bad decisions, or they use excessive force in a situation because of something that normally they would not have responded to that way. And then they quit and they're out because of that frustration. Everybody judges and critiques everything that you do, but oftentimes the other party's able to act like whatever again. So why is it again that law enforcement's so stressful? But I want you to remember this as law enforcement. If you're watching this and you're law enforcement, we need you. Whether you're a reserve, working part-time, or you're working full-time, we need you. Find balance, whether that is working part-time or that's working full-time. Find balance And remember that when you're old and gray, the badge and the bad guys won't be there for you. But hopefully, if we're fortunate, if we're blessed, our families will. And so sometimes we have to make decisions to take a step back. I know guys that have taken breaks. I know people that have retired. I know people that have gone to part-time and gotten things in their life back in order and in balance, and then come back to the badge. For me, the way that I try to remember it, I couldn't do it full-time, by the way. I do it part-time as a chaplain with a badge, and I run out at times that are critical, and I back officers, but I spend time with them to help with the loneliness, to help them talk through problems, to help them talk about life and love and marriage and kids and finances and heartaches that come with it, and getting stepped on by admin. And sometimes the frustrations are very understandable, where this person didn't get this promotion but this person did, or whatever, or the chief is suddenly gone, and now the dynamics of that relationship have completely changed at the department, and that chief had promised them something that was going to happen, but now that chief is gone and now there's a new one there. All of these things are a deal. For me, the balance that I have, the way that I balance it out of my brain, I've got 4 patches on my wall, and the patches say man of God, husband, father, brother's keeper. First off, I'm a man of God. I'm a Christian. I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and then I'm my wife's husband. And kids, as much as we love them, they're going to grow up and move out and become adults. Mine are all adults now, and they're going to start their lives with their significant others, and hopefully pop out healthy grandkids. I've got one now, but they're going to move out. So remember to put your spouse long-term ahead of your kids. It's a broken philosophy in our society that our kids come ahead of our spouse. I don't mean abuse your kids. I don't mean neglect your kids. I mean realize that if you want to be married in 50 years, you better love your spouse and be there for them. And then father, being there for your kids and making sure that your kids get what they need, enough hugs and enough discipline and enough trips to the park and enough experiences. And then follow that up with the fact that then you're your brother's keeper. Because if you have your life balanced in the right way, and then you are your husband's keeper, that is a healthy way to look at and respond to those things. So, as always, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. Remember Semper Disciplina, that lifestyle of discipline training. Remember to keep God first. God bless.